Good Tuesday evening, friends. It is July the 22nd. This is Hurricane Hub Live on 13 News Now Plus, and I'm Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandajis. Let's get right into it on HHL tonight. Our Tropic Topics, well, 94L, that investigative area that was tagged out in the Atlantic that we talked about yesterday, well, development odds have been significantly slashed, and by slashed, I mean they're zero. Not likely to develop. However, there is a brand new spot that's been tagged for interest out in the Atlantic Basin. In fact, it's in the Northern Gulf. And we'll talk about that here coming up in just a couple of minutes. It was literally just put out from the National Hurricane Center with their Tropical Outlook this evening. And it's got low chances of development, but it may be something interesting to watch here in the coming days. And overall, conditions are slowly becoming more favorable. There are some leading indicators that potentially are pointing to some greater activity on the horizon, and certainly as we get into August. And that's been typically the case in regard to climatology. It always gets more active in August, and just the last couple of seasons, it's been rather quiet to start things off, and then August is like flipping a switch. So out in the Atlantic Basin, here we are with what's left of 94L. You got Barbados, the Lesser Antilles here, not too far off to the east from there. So definitely some squalls, some tropical squalls, very disorganized. And eventually, as it moves into the Caribbean, just not favorable environmental conditions at this time. But we are seeing more and more in the way of more activity, more robust tropical waves, African easterly waves emerging off the coast of Africa and beginning to seed what's becoming a more fertile environment in the main development region. We're going to focus a little bit more on the MDR here and why that is so important for a hurricane season to put out higher numbers, or at least average numbers. Still a lot of dust out there, but as we've been talking about, we've been watching this slowly gaining latitude and lifting farther to the north, which is typical as we get later into the season. The dust doesn't become as much of a problem. All right, here's the brand new area tagged by the National Hurricane Center. Now, what we've seen in the past several areas of interest that have been tagged, that have been in the Northern Gulf or off the southeast coast of the U.S., is a trailing cold front that dips south. The tail end of it dips into the tropics, and it adds a little bit of spin. You can already see that here, this cluster of disorganized weather right now that's off the southeast coastline will drift over the Florida Peninsula and then make its way into the Northern Gulf, where conditions are marginally favorable. Okay, I mean, look at the odds here. We're not talking about a sure bet on getting Dexter anytime soon, but a 10% chance for this tropical wave to maybe organize a bit. There are some very low model support for this, but we'll see. We're getting farther and farther into the season, so conditions look a little bit better as we get day in and day out. This does line up with the Climate Prediction Center's outlook that they just issued today, and that does highlight that exact same area that the National Hurricane Center just put the area of interest hash on, 10% odds. This right here, the low, is around 20% odds from the Climate Prediction Center. So maybe an area to watch as we go forward. All right, let's talk about what's been going on in the main development region. What you're looking at here are sea surface temperature anomalies, so the departure from where they normally should be this time of year. And wherever you see the yellows, and if you look closely, there are some darker shades of yellow and orange. In particular, over a large portion of the Atlantic Basin, the subtropics out near Bermuda, and then down in the main development region, we are seeing anomalies that are now significantly warmer than where they typically are this time of the year. And that's been really a drastic change in the warmer direction over the last month or so. We started off the season seeing, small anomalies, a little bit warmer than normal, but compared with last year, much cooler than where they've been. And even right now, compared to July 2024, they are much cooler than a year ago, but still have seen a pronounced warming trend over the last month. Now, what's been driving that? Well, a large Bermuda high, a strong Bermuda high that's been present since the start of the season, has dramatically weakened. And when it was stronger, it was driving strong trade winds across the main development region. And that kept temperatures from really warming up all that much, the sea surface temperatures. Now that that is weakened, it has slowed the trade winds, meaning the main development region is warming on up and really right on point for where it should be going this time of the year, kind of setting the stage for a more fertile environment, more conducive, favorable environment for growth and intensification from the seedlings, the African easterly waves that come off of the coast. Now, why the MDR is important for a hurricane season in regards to the number of storms is 85% of all major hurricanes originate from the main development region. And if you look at it on a map, it's a large area. It stretches all the way from the eastern Caribbean all the way out to the Cabo Verde Islands. Okay, this is a huge area, and it typically begins to activate in late July. Sometimes we have some early originators, like Beryl last year did come out of the main development region in June. This year it's been quiet for the most part, with the exception of 94L. That's been the only area out there that's been something to watch, but as we know, it's no longer something to watch. But July through the heart of hurricane season, this can put out some real doozies. It can put out some powerhouses, but it's not always where the major storms come from. You look back to last year, okay? Milton and Helene, both major hurricanes, both made landfall in the U.S., came from the Gulf and the Caribbean. Both of those were not MDR productions. So 85%. Interesting. All right, here we are in terms of climatology the season. We're almost a third of the way through the season, okay? Starts June 1st, ends November 30th. We're almost clear through July, and we've only had Chantal. Although if you've watched these HHL last week, I think we were talking about it, is that July's, over the past 5 hurricane seasons, has typically had 1 or 2 named storms, has been the normal. And it looks like this year will fall right in place with that. The only anomaly was 2020, which I think we had 5 storms in July. And you know how that season went, 30 named storms later. So July 22nd, here we are. And typically as we get into August, as you would expect, activity really starts to open up. Really, I'd say mid-August, August 15th or so is typically like, the first peak. And then we see a secondary peak, obviously, by the early part of September, right around September the 10th or so. How about in the Eastern Pacific? It's quiet out there once again. As you get a little bit farther off to the west, though, there is an area of interest there. That's got a 20% hash on it for the next 7 days. Here's Hawaii. So this, if this does get going, it will likely pass by off to the south there, but not going to be impacting anybody as it tracks well to the south of Hawaii. All right, yesterday's tropical trivia question I asked you. In the Atlantic, which storm holds the record for the most distance traveled? I mean, this one's remarkable, okay? Was it Sandy, Irma, Gustav, or Alberto? The answer is D, Alberto. And this was back in the year 2000. And this thing came out of the MDR, okay? It was an African easterly wave, moved north, never made landfall in the U.S. Kind of did a little loop-de-loop here, just to the west of the Azores. And then look at this thing. This sucker went up through Iceland and into the Arctic Circle. Traveled 6,500 miles, Alberto. It was a Cat 3 at its peak. So it was a major hurricane, but thankfully it didn't impact anybody. I think it did bring some pretty gusty winds as it transitioned to extratropical as it moved to the north to Iceland, but pretty remarkable to see it that far north up into the Arctic Circle. All right, here's today's question for you. Rapid intensification has become more common. You hear us talking about that all the time with these major storms that just kind of explode with the very warm sea surface temperatures that we've had season after season. So my question for you today is, what's the largest 12-hour pressure drop on record? So the largest intensification over that amount of time, right? Is it 25 millibars, 53 millibars, 83 millibars, or 96 millibars? I'll have the answer for you tomorrow night on HHL at 8 p.m. All right, in the meantime, though, scan that QR code. You want to download the 13 News Now Hurricane Guide. It is information on supplies you should have on hand, emergency numbers you might need, and a whole lot more. Check it out. And remember, we're here every Monday through Friday, every weekday at 8 p.m. for HHL. And, of course, as we get more active, these segments will be much, much longer with just a plethora of knowledge. All right, we'll see you back here tomorrow at 8 p.m.